right. We should be live. So we're going to give this a few seconds here to get everybody logged in. Got Mike in queue, ready to go. It's going to be a good webinar, guys. Mike and I were just talking about his fire building or fire preventive skills. So he's got a little story to share with everybody once we go live here as well. Mike, are you out in Indiana today? Is that
Indiana today, Nashville tomorrow, Michigan on Sunday? So, all through the Midwest.
Covering the Midwest states. We're out here in the Northwest. We actually have some sunshine today, but we've got some crazy thunderstorms on schedule for us, which we don't usually get.
Been some crazy.
We're getting we got some thunderstorms, which we don't normally get out here in the Northwest. See what comes of that. I know, like Melissa's up in Seattle, and they were talking about golf ball sized hail, which I know for some of you is a normal event, but we don't see anything like that. And maybe a mini tornado. Okay, let's get this party started. Welcome everybody to our March 2025 Fireside Chat. We're on our second one of the year, and so far so good. Today's speaker is going to be a gentleman by the name of, and I say that lightly, Mike. I met Mike a couple months ago. Heck of a good guy, Mike Nader. He has been in conjunction with a long-standing client of 6 Degrees. So we've had not only the pleasure of working with him, with that client, but I've also had the pleasure of meeting him in person, and he's done a few speaking things for 6 Degrees at our symposiums. He does a phenomenal job, and I think you're going to find him not only entertaining, but incredibly knowledgeable. He's got an extensive, Mike, if you want to go to the About slide, I'll give people some insight as to what's going on here, but some extensive experience with creating policies and procedures in the welfare compensation area. He's also been a benefit manager in the compensation space, and I think that brings him some real world experience that he gets to share with us today. He is also a law professor at Notre Dame, so some of you that may give him praise, others might have you looking down on him, but either way, let's welcome him and bring him in to talk about all the things in regards to Lions, Tigers, and Trump. Oh my! So let's get going on it.
Yeah. Thanks, Heath. I assume I have control of the mouse.
I believe you do.
Nice to meet all of you. I always go through a little bit of administrative things at the beginning. First, for those that heard me in Phoenix, I always apologize in advance for my comments. I've been doing this a long time, and if you don't have fun doing it, it can be stressful. So I tend to be politically incorrect. As I tell my students at Notre Dame, there's no such thing as a safe zone in my classroom. And if you can't take a joke, maybe you shouldn't be a lawyer. So far I haven't been turned in yet for being politically incorrect, but if I offend you, I apologize in advance. The things that we're going to talk about today are questions that we've received in advance, together with questions that I've received from brokers, from clients, from TPAs, pretty much all across the benefit spectrum. Just kind of hot button subjects, and then tossing in how the Trump administration comes into play during all of these activities. What we talk about today, you're getting my, kind of uncluttered, unrestricted opinions. As he said, I was a benefit manager, and a lot of times I would hear lawyers talk, and they would talk about how complex problems were, but never give you an answer or a solution. what I talk about today shouldn't be taken as legal advice for you or your clients. It's things to consider, but every problem, every situation is unique and needs to be evaluated. So as you listen to this and you say, well, Mike Nader gave this opinion, and so we did it, now it blew up. You know, it can happen, right? So that it very fact sensitive, risk tolerance of your client comes into play, whether the union, non-union, culture. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I do want to point out the fire behind me is kind of my standard fire. I have land up in Michigan. It's been in the family for 50 years. And so you can tell that I don't use like little log chunks, but like the entire tree stump. I got a tractor, build awesome bonfires. But the one picture I do have to show you, because I'm not just a complete pyro, is my neighbor. Can you guys see this picture, Heath?
Sure can.
So my neighbor across the way decided he wanted to have a fire at about 30-mile-an-hour winds last March, and he caught the field on fire. And so about caught in to a junkyard so you can see what's burning back there. Neighbors come running over and say, hey, Nader, get your tractor, build a fire break. We got to save the homes. And so there's a tractor right in the center of that. And that's me on my tractor playing in the fire. So I've been accused of being a pyro. I didn't start this fire, but it was just, I mean, no houses burned, nobody got hurt. So it was just, if you guys are ever in Michigan, want to come by for a big bonfire, kind of hard to do some more, feel free to come over.
When when I asked Mike to think about doing a fireside chat for us, he goes, I've got the perfect backdrop for that. So shortly after that event occurred.
So as we go through this, I'm going to jump into it. As we go through this, if you have questions, you can text the questions. Heath will interrupt me and he'll keep track of those. This is really as much as I've got an outline and PowerPoints. If you want to go down a different path, if you have different questions, this is your opportunity. So,
yeah. And as those questions come in, you guys just put them into the chat function. You can see that switch or that button at the bottom of your Zoom browser. Try to keep them out of the chat section. So use the Q&A button for questions, and I will build them into the presentation as we go.
All right, thanks. So in January, so we have the no gag clause. No gag clause came from the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021. Essentially, it prohibits plan sponsors and insurers from entering into an agreement that restricts the dissemination of information to participants regarding quality, cost of claims. And we're still working through contracts, right? It's amazing how many contracts have confidentiality clauses even today, 4 years later, a little bit more. The Department of Labor in January issued Q&A guidance. That's their new favorite way of issuing updates, where they've clarified that the plan sponsor's obligation to ensure there are no gag clauses in its contracts extends to contracts that it enters into indirectly. So for instance, if an employer enters into an agreement with a third-party administrator, the third-party administrator is the primary contracting party with a PBM or a PPO. The Department of Labor has made clear that the no gag clause rule extends to that PPO contract, to that PBM contract, and that information has to be disclosed or disclosable. And when you have the no gag attestation, It includes all of your contracts that may contain and or restrict the flow of information and the disclosure of information. And it's not just to the participant, but also to business associates. And so as we look at the no gag rule, it continues to, it's like an onion. You continue to peel back an onion, and there are just layers and layers of confidentiality requirements. And whether those are in repricing agreements, PPO agreements, PBM agreements, that information needs to be made available. Some of the some of the networks continue to try to restrict that information or the use of that information. And so when you think about the no gag attestation, it's important that as you talk to your clients, and we may have some employers on the phone, but my understanding is most of the folks are the vendors. And the clients look to you to help them with this attestation, is to make sure that you push back against the vendors, and that when this no gag attestation is filed in December of each year, that it's accurate. It is interesting, there's a provision that says, if as an employer, you're filing your attestation and you realize that one of your contracts is in violation, you should report non-compliance under other information. I haven't had that come up yet. I can sure as heck see myself making sure that we find a way to not report a violation to CMS. But in the guidance issued in January, they encourage people to report violating provisions. And so it's an odd note, but I would venture to guess 99.9% of the clients out there will not report a violation. On this slide, the no gag clause versus reference-based pricing or repricers versus network agreements. The Trump administration, and it started off in their transparency regs before Trump lost the election. The Trump administration is very much about transparency and pricing, including machine-readable files. There has been a lot of consternation as information that comes up because of the no gag clause rule and transparency, machine-readable files that is publicly available, where you have vendors, including 6 Degrees, that are looking at information on network pricing, where the network says the discounted price for this is $100,000, and the machine readable file shows a contract that says $80,000. And so there's a real tension right now as this information becomes more available, more readable, where all of the different parties are trying to determine how it can be used. And so as it's being disclosed, we have, and I've gone through this with some of the BUCAs, where the BUCAs have said, look, you're in our PPO contract. Our PPO contract says you will pay $100,000. But the information online at the medical provider may say it's $80,000. And there's a real conflict between which price applies. And right now, the BUCAs have stayed pretty strong that their PPO contract controls the price. So as you go through this process with 6 Degrees, with repricers, there are a number of different vendors that do it. Even though this information is becoming more transparent, more available, it doesn't necessarily make it any easier in administering your plan. And in fact, it could create risk. So in one situation, in the stop loss policy, there's a requirement that the all invoices get run through a 6 Degrees or a similar service provider to ensure that it within the parameters of the policy and that it's reasonable and customary. And that pricing may be under the PPO contract rate. And so now you have a stop loss carrier saying we want to pay 50,000 and a PPO carrier sponsor saying you should pay 100,000, and the employer is stuck in the middle. And so that's one of those policies that it's still working itself out, where the medical providers, the PPO contractors, the network sponsors, the stop loss carriers are all trying to use this relatively newly available information to get the lowest price possible. And that's not always what the network providers want. I find it interesting that we've had a couple cases where it's a PPO provider, they've agreed to a single case discount, and the network provider, one of the BUCAs, for instance, says, no, you can't do that. You have to pay the PPO price. It's like, well, what do you care if the provider doesn't care? So there's a real challenge in the marketplace. I think 6 Degrees does a great job on its pricing and the information that it has available. But you could just see that tension ripple through. Heath, if you want to weigh in on kind of the different elements of what you're seeing in the marketplace.
I mean, I think you're doing a great job of outlining everything here. I mean, we obviously take pride in the work that we do and the services we give, our clientele around these things. But it takes a village to make sure that it's all working together. We need support from individuals like yourself to communicate these things to the client so that they understand that that everybody's doing their portion of the work that has to be done to save plans money and not let them get taken advantage of.
And again, that just to kind of wrap this up, I've had stop loss carriers and brokers and say, well, and this comes up quite a bit on implants, right? Somebody gets charged $250,000 for an implant, and the hospital paid 25 grand for it. And everybody says, well, we should pay 25,000 for that device. But if you have a network agreement that says you'll pay 250, and the employer pays 25, and the network and the provider 2 years down the road says, oh, by the way, you owe us 225,000, you're going to be outside of your contract period for your stop loss. And so it's important as you look at repricing and take discounts that may not be in line with PPO agreement, that the parties understand, including the stop loss carrier, claim may come after the contract period, and will that be covered or won't it? And it's always good to have that agreement nailed down with the stop loss carrier before the contract period expires.
Yeah, and in regards to stop loss, we've had some guests on here that have spoke specifically to things to consider and be aware of, and doing stop loss and RVP together. And there's definitely some out there that are strong at it, and they're getting creative in terms of the policy and how long those policies run out. And you're also seeing some creativity around implementing programs like our MediShield, which covers life of claim, and how that impacts stop loss or stop loss policies that are willing to cover that same time frame. So ask those questions when you're getting your quotes for stop loss, and make sure that it's getting you the coverage that you need to manage RVP claims properly.
State mandated disclosures. The Supreme Court, in my opinion, messed up several years ago. There was a case in Arkansas on regulating pharmacy benefit manager And basically the Supreme Court said parts of that law were not preempted by ERISA because it affected the pricing between the manufacturer and the pharmacist, and not the administration of the plan, just how much the plan paid. The states across the country, we're seeing more and more try to regulate ERISA government plans indirectly. And the two examples that I have listed, Arkansas has disclosure on PBM claims. Florida just recently issued their Department of Insurance, Office of Insurance, issued a broad sweeping request to the PBMs asking for significant pricing information, including the individual. It's protected health information. It's not even de-identified. And so if your clients are receiving these requests or you're receiving these requests, it's not as easy as just saying, yeah, let's just give it to them. Let's not pick a fight. The question is, do we have an obligation to disclose, we, the plan sponsor, or your vendor, right? And remember, on self-funded plans, the health plan is the covered entity for HIPAA. It owns the information. So if I have a PBM or a TPA and they hold my plan information, that's still the covered entity's information. The covered entity still needs to protect it. So those vendors should be coming back to the plan sponsor and asking, do you want us to disclose this or do we resist? And so I've had these requests come in both for Arkansas, for Florida, and the first position I take is ERISA preemption to the extent that my plans are subject to ERISA. That's supported by a Supreme Court case. Basically, ERISA sets forth the disclosure obligations of plan sponsors, health plans. And so to that, I basically tell the states politely, no reason to pick a fight, but the state, your disclosure law is preempted by ERISA. And these cases are working themselves through. Chambers of Commerce are challenging those. In the two states that I've got listed, where I basically told the vendors do not respond, other than to politely say we're governed by ERISA, the states have not pushed back yet. I assume Florida will become more aggressive. Remember, they've just started asking for the information just recently. So they may push back against the PBMs, they may push back against TPAs. But my first is ERISA preemption. If you say, well, why don't I just give it to them? Well, remember, you're providing HIPAA protected health information. And to the extent you're providing HIPAA protected health information, if there is a legal requirement to disclose it, you may fit into an exception. But if the state doesn't have the legal authority to force you to disclose it, you may be violating HIPAA by providing too much PHI. And so, I basically tell the states, look, HIPAA prohibits us from disclosing this because our plan is not subject to your regulatory authority. So the last part of potential inconsistencies of disclosures, remember, as you provide information to the state, there's machine readable files. There are disclosures that have to be made to the government agencies. And so as you provide PBM information, and they really seem hyped up on PBM more than healthcare claims, there's the potential that you're giving inconsistent information to different government agencies. I doubt those government agencies will ever compare notes, but maybe plaintiffs' lawyers will. So my view on the state mandated coverages is to restrict access, to push back, to use ERISA preemption and HIPAA as reasons. And your vendors, I say your vendors, The PBMs, the TPAs should take direction from the covered entities. There are some that will push back and say, well, this may get us sideways with government regulators. Well, that's fine. We'll deal with that. But to me, it is important to make sure that on ERISA preemption, we don't go down that slippery slide and start being exposed to various state law mandates. State law mandates are not just on disclosure of information. Colorado was passed a law that was trying to regulate PBMs heavier than they did in Arkansas. And the Supreme Court swatted that back a bit. So we're in a real, when I first started forever ago, ERISA preemption was awesome. I mean, all you had to do was say ERISA preemption and the court would throw the case out. It was the best time to be a benefit lawyer. Now the Supreme Court has watered down ERISA preemption. So we have, states assessing taxes against self-funded plans, New York, Michigan, several others, disclosure regulations. It's interesting, their position is we're not regulating a health plan, we're regulating the PBM or the TPA, who we do have authority over. And so that's where the tension comes in. But don't hesitate to push back against your vendors when they come and say, we have this request. Well, let's push back. Let's see, where we take it. Transgender services. This is I would consider this kind of a yo-yo. And by that, I mean, if you think about 16 to 20, we were, under Trump administration, then we moved to the Biden administration for 4 years, and now we're back to the Trump administration. And employers are trying to make sense of what obligations they have to provide transgender services. The Trump administration has rolled back transgender protections, the extent of 1557 as to what's protected. But the employers are stuck right in the middle of this fight as to what is covered and isn't covered. My starting point, Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, is that 1557 applies to entities that take federal funds, Medicare, Medicaid, so hospitals, maybe schools, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the health plan because self-funded health plans don't take federal funds unless you're in Medicare Advantage, and I don't think we have any of those on the phone. So when you think about 1557, the first is to say it doesn't apply to the health plan. That doesn't necessarily end the analysis, though. You still have the mental parity laws, right? Where some transgender services will be characterized as a mental nervous treatment. And does mental parity come into play? There are numerous judges throughout the country that are dealing with transgender services, whether they're protected under the ACA, Title VII, mental parity. And so just because the Trump administration is moving the standard to say there's less protection, there are less mandates, it doesn't make the problem go away. And so with respect to transgender services, as you discuss with your clients and the conversations that I've had, it's like, yes, you can exclude them, but you may get to a point where a individual challenges that is a violation of ERISA, the ACA, Title VII, and a lawsuit is going to be expensive. And so as we think about transgender services and all that go with transgender services, I would say 3/4 of my clients have just said, you know what, we're gonna cover it. Doesn't happen that often. And in the scheme of things, it's gonna cost us a heck of a lot less than a lawsuit. The 25% that, focus on transgender, a lot of it is moral and religious beliefs. And they don't believe they should be covering it. So when you think about the Trump administration and you hear how they're pulling back transgender rights, protections, just because the Trump administration is doing that doesn't make it go away. And if you end up in a lawsuit over transgender services, your company's legal bills could easily be a couple $100,000. So what I tell my clients that have it, it's like you can leave the exclusion in, but at some point you may decide to cover it on an extra contractual basis, one-off basis, just so that it, doesn't get to the state of litigation, which, lawyers are expensive and I'd rather avoid it if I can.
Hey, Mike, I had a question come in. Is there any new movement similar to like the CAA that would subject the underlying plan partner, i.e. a BUCA, to allow external bill review vendors like a 6 Degrees Health the ability to access and audit the claim and have the underlying plan partner pay the claim according to the 6 Degrees bill review? Or are we still in the same spot we are today and being prevented from accessing the claim and the ability for a bill review to be done?
So back to the slide on the no gag rule. Department of Labor has said if a member is entitled to this information, a business associate is entitled to this information. So some of the vendors would say, look, if I have to give it to the member, okay, but I'm not going to give it to the TPA or the business associate. So I think the guidance is assisting the disclosure of those pricing, but it doesn't answer the question, can I pay the lower amount? Can I use 6 Degrees? Like I say, that the BUCAs that I've run into are pushing, it's like, look, we don't care where you get your information. We're telling you what the contract price is. So I don't see any guidance coming from the government that is going to resolve that. I mean, if you think about the lobbyists for the BUCAs, and I'm not knocking the BUCAs, I just, they're the 800-pound gorillas, right? They're the ones out there and they have their networks and they're going to make sure that those networks are protected. So I don't see any, what you're really talking about is, can they take the No Surprises Act and extend it, to PPO type claims? And I've not heard of any guidance being talked about within any of the 3 agencies, IRS, HHS, and DOL. I think it's going to be a kind of a constant battle as to, do you stay in the network or do you, just go full reference-based pricing? And I've got clients that do both. So I've heard a number of, some products that are coming out where the vendor says, look, we're going to run reference-based pricing. And if we can't get that pricing, we're going to flip to a PPO. Essentially, it's the reverse of a blind PPO. We're going to run it through reference, see if they take it. And if not, then we'll go PPO. That strategy worries me. I don't see anything in the regulations that would support that. It's all going to be contractual. So I think we're going to be, that would be asking the DOL to get too much into the weeds. And I think it would probably be pretty disruptive to the BUCAs, which, have a significant amount of the, membership covered. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I don't see the guidance coming from any of our agencies that are going to assist us other than, continuing to push back against that pricing based upon the information that's made available publicly.
It's like you got a thumbs up on that one, Mike. 100% answered. Well done.
Well, damn, I must have done something wrong. Let's see. We got transgender. CMS. I hesitate on this one because it's the most irritating. So we're dealing with Medicare secondary payer status, right? And obviously, Medicare secondary payer statute says if your plan is primary and Medicare pays primary, it should have been secondary, you owe CMS whatever it paid. I can't tell you how many clients, both employers, TPAs, brokers, that I've been dealing with over the past 6 months. It's like somebody kicked a hornet's nest. CMS has hired vendors to go out and audit employers and send out letters in mass to employers, to TPAs, asking about primary status and secondary status. And if you don't answer the question just right, or you don't follow the rules for that first initial letter, the vendor will send a letter back saying that's not an acceptable answer. So give you an example of how into the minutia it gets. One of the inquiries said the explanation has to come from the plan sponsor. And the TPA responded. And it was the same information. Clearly the person wasn't covered. Medicare was primary. And the vendor said, this letter did not come from the employer. We're not going to accept it. And it's asinine, right? Because the TPA has an obligation to report. It also has exposure. And so we are seeing these vendors send, I'd ask everybody for a show of hands, but I've got clients where they get 5 requests for the same claim, and they respond the first 2 or 3 times. And these vendors continue to send these letters and say, that's not a valid explanation. And it's clear as day the person wasn't covered. And CMS is taking the position, you didn't answer correctly, you didn't answer timely, you owe us. Well, CMS will then turn the claim over, the vendor will turn the claim over to the Department of Treasury. The Department of Treasury will send a bill to the employer that says you owe $100,000 to CMS. And there's not really a great avenue to appeal from the Department of Treasury. If you fail to pay that, the Department of Treasury will take tax returns, will take your grant money. When I say your, the employers. I sent a letter off yesterday, Monday, losing track of time. Department of Treasury took $100,000 refund my client was supposed to receive. And now the CFO is pissed. That's a legal term. Basically saying, hey, where's my $100,000 refund? And there's government's still trying to claim 500 grand from this employer. And we can show with a certainty that these individuals were not covered. And so now the Department of Treasury has turned it over to a collection agency. The collection agency has basically, I talked to them the other day, they're like, look, if you don't pay this, we're going to turn it over to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice will sue you. And so if you think back before, they used to send letters and then it would just go away and nobody would take action. What I have witnessed in the past 6 months are these collection agencies and federal enforcement with the Department of Treasury taking money otherwise due the employer, where you end up with significant refunds at risk and not a great deal of opportunity to appeal. And so in the case I just mentioned, there's probably a dozen different people affected. What we've done is, and this is where they're taking money out of the company's federal refund, C Corp. And we sent a letter back to Department of Treasury and also to CMS, basically saying, look, we've explained this once before, and these people have not been covered, and your own records show that. And so we believe this is a violation of the due process of the Constitution, that it's an impermissible taking. We told them to put a litigation hold on. We're going to file the Freedom of Information Act. And essentially, we're trying to smack down CMS because once the feds take your money, it's damn near impossible to get it back. And so you should all work with your clients and the TPAs. As these letters come in, we used to just, they just got pushed aside because they're kind of a pain to respond to. But based upon what I have witnessed in the enforcement, CMS, it's like almost Doge in reverse. I hate to say that, but it's kind of like, oh, we better go collect money so we don't all get fired. And so I think they're ramping up these collection efforts to show that they're getting Medicare secondary payer money back. But to the extent your clients receive these letters, it's important that they timely respond and follow the little nuances and explain that the person wasn't primary, wasn't secondary, wasn't covered. The days of kind of throwing them in the garbage and seeing, that no one ever came after you, they're gone. And nothing tees off a CFO more than watch their, refund get taken by the federal government. And you have to explain Medicare secondary payer statute. It's not a pretty sight. So an area that I think is going to continue to increase to irritate your clients will be CMS. I think the Trump administration and trying to raise revenue is indirectly, I can't say it's directly, I don't know, but I think it's indirectly fostering this aggressive attitude for collection. And I truly believe that CMS is hiring vendors that aren't doing their job and aren't listening to employers and TPAs explaining why amounts are due. It's like beating your head against the wall. You keep giving the same answer and they keep ignoring you, and it gets really irritating. But you don't want to let it go because the Department of Treasury will take your money. And they won't even say thanks. They'll just say, we're adding interest and you still owe us more. So if your clients haven't received these letters yet, they will, because it is a significant fundraising effort. That's how I see it. So I'll let you guys know at the next event, 6 Degrees, has how my letter goes over with CMS. They'll probably just blow me off, but I am going to file Freedom of Information Act just to rattle the cage.
Got a question came in here, Mike. Any of your clients been sued by the DOJ?
Say that again. Have they been sued by the DOJ?
Yep.
No, not yet. I've had them threatened. Right now, with respect to CMS, the collection agency has said, if you don't pay us, we're turning this over to the DOJ. Just because they turn it over to the DOJ doesn't mean the DOJ is going to want to sue. And like I say, it's $500,000. It's not chump change. But we'll have an opportunity. DOJ will probably send a demand letter and, basically try to resolve it. So with respect to that, DOJ hasn't sued. I've had the other close ones. I don't know if any of you folks have had this, but on mental parity, instead of auditing the employers on mental parity, on their self-funded health plans, the Department of Labor went to the BUCAs and said, we want you to go review all of your self-funded health plan clients and tell us who has clauses that violate mental parity and report them back to us. And a couple of my clients received letters, I'll leave the BUCAs nameless, that basically said, hey, we turned you into the DOL because we think this clause violates it. And, you know, if you don't pay this claim from 5 years ago, we have to tell the DOL. And I'm like, that's 5 years ago, statute of limitations, we're not paying it. So the client said, okay, we won't pay it. And sure enough, we get a letter from the Department of Labor. And I'm like, statute of limitations, you can't sue us, it's barred. And the DOL agent basically took two approaches. One, he said, you currently have that provision in your plan and it's a violation of the Mental Parity Act and the ACA, so we can assess penalties. We'll open an audit and we'll litigate it. Now, that was 18 months ago. So they've not done it. I don't expect them to come back. Sometimes I think that their bark is worse than their bite. So if you're not taking plan assets, misusing plan assets, I think they're, the DOJ, the DOL, the IRS, they'd rather resolve it in a friendly manner than sue. The problem with the Department of Labor or Department of Treasury, it doesn't have to sue. It just gets to take the money. And you're left like, what the hell happened to my refund? So employer subsidized ACA exchange coverage. I've had this conversation. This is a real touchy conversation. It is one in 2014, the Department of Labor came out with its Q&A guidance. Make sure I don't get too far over. Came out with its Q&A guidance that said an employer, if it pays for a participant to go get an exchange policy, even if it's better and even if the employer pays full value, it's a violation of the Affordable Care Act because you're discriminating a person because of their health condition, health status. Now, the reason I believe the Department of Labor did that in 2014, unlike Medicare, right? Medicare has an anti-dumping clause. Medicare says you cannot encourage, pressure someone to go on to Medicare. That doesn't exist in the exchanges. There's nothing that prohibits an employer from saying in the Affordable Care Act that expressly prohibits an employer from saying, hey, you need a heart transplant, why don't you go to the exchange? I'll pay your premium. The DOL's trying to stop that by saying it's a violation. In the regs, ERISA before ACA, there's a concept known as benign discrimination, good discrimination, that, I can discriminate in favor of a participant who's got a disability. So for instance, I could buy someone's insulin and not buy everybody else's because it's helping them. It's good discrimination. I'm trying to help the person. So I look at benign discrimination. I look at the use of ICRAs, individual coverage, HRAs, which came up during the first Trump administration. Biden administration continued them. And in individual coverage IRAs, it's all built around sending participants to an exchange subsidized by the employer. And so I've gotten to a point, and it's very fact sensitive, and it has a lot to do with the employee at issue or dependent, as well as the employer and their risk tolerance. But we have had some success in getting high cost participants into an exchange policy subsidized by the employer. I've yet to have the DOL or any other government agency challenge that, or any exchange challenge it. So it is a potential opportunity for you to help your clients. On the tax consequences, there are different ways to gross up the premiums, to treat it as a taxable event. There are also ways that you may be able to treat it as a gift, to run it. Can't really run it under your healthcare plan because it's an individual policy. We've used ICRAs to do it on a pre-tax basis. But the long and short, if you have clients that have catastrophic participants, there may be an opportunity. I do want to take 30 seconds, as you talk with your clients or your clients talk with the vendors, and I say clients when the employers, it is so important to make sure that all of us, lawyers included, be very careful what we put in emails, text messages, voicemails. Attorney-client privilege doesn't always apply when I'm talking to fiduciaries. I take the rule that I have 4 kids, I have the same rule. So if you don't want to read about it in the paper, don't put it in print. And by that, I mean, people will put the damnedest thing in emails. So I had a client send me an email and said, hey, we just hired this guy. His wife has cancer. We need to fire him. I'm like, geez, tell me you didn't tell your broker that, right? The employers, they are discriminating, they're violating laws, but they see a $500,000 claim come in where they just hire the person for 100,000 and they're like, oh, geez, oh man. What do we do about this? So be very careful with what you put in your emails with your clients. And what I always tell people is like, don't editorialize. Don't sit there and say, this guy's a jerk. If I didn't know better, I'd rather just deny his claim. Just stuff you say off the top of your head, you're irritated. That stuff comes back in lawsuits. It gets discovered, makes you look bad, or your client looks bad. And so I've been on the phone with a number of folks on the phone in this presentation. You've heard me say, put your pencils down. Don't take notes, right? We may not have privilege, and I can't control what you write down of what I say. Nader said we could screw the guy. Somebody writes that down. That's generally not a good idea. Right? And just talking tongue in cheek, but people write stuff down. And so when we talk about employer subsidized ACA coverage, it's a very sensitive fact situation. It's a sensitive dance of how you raise it. Just verbal conversations are so much better than emails and text messages. Just because you hit delete doesn't mean they go away. And I'm sure most everyone on this call has received a text message or email where you're like, which person wouldn't have sent that, right? And so as we talk about these sensitive areas, I always like to take a minute to say, tell your clients, look, let's talk about this. Don't send me a long email, a fact situation of why you don't want to pay a claim or why you want to fire somebody or, so. Sorry, I just looked at only because it's the collection agency.
Hey, Mike, we got a question come in. I think it's in association with this slide. It came in a little bit earlier, but what if an individual goes directly to the carrier, not via the exchange?
Goes to just a individual policy?
I'm not positive. I'm guessing so. Katie, if you want to expand on that, feel free. But it came in right when we went to this slide earlier.
What's that?
It came in probably 5 minutes ago when you first got to this slide.
Okay, and what's the question?
What if an individual goes directly to the carrier, not via the exchange?
So some of the carriers have individual policies. There are not a lot of those left. To me, it's if the individual goes to the carrier and you subsidize it, the Department of Labor probably could make the same argument because you the employer probably encouraged it. Most employees don't leave their plan without some encouragement. But I don't think it lessens the risk. But I don't think the risk, as I tell my clients, if the DOL came in and assessed a penalty, call it 75 grand a year, right? $200 a day, give or take. But you're paying $1 million for this claim. There's a trade-off, right? You move the $1 million off your books onto an exchange policy, and the risk that the DOL comes in is not great. And if they do come in, we'll negotiate, right? And knock on wood, I've yet to have the DOL come in on any of the cases that I've had over the last handful of years. So, but I don't think it mitigates the risk that much if you go directly to an insurer. Now, the real key is, as I tell people, you go to one of your employees that has high dollar claims, and you ask them to go to the exchange and they say no, then that's the end of the conversation. You cannot force that person, no duress, no threats. That person is on your plan. They have the absolute right. And if it's a poor performer and you want to fire them, and you decide to fire them after they say no, you're gonna get sued. So that's why I say fact situations are so important, right? If I got a poor performer, I'm not sure I want to ask that person that question, right? I'm gonna think about firing the person, and they say no to an exchange, and then I fire them. I'm gonna draw all kinds of lawsuits. 510 claim under ERISA, ADA, Title VII. So again, every situation when we're talking about moving someone to an exchange is very fact sensitive and needs to be truly evaluated by all parties involved.
All right, we're down to 3 minutes here, Mike. I think we got a couple slides left, so let's march forward. We'll wrap it up.
So that's last slide, then Q&A. So qualified high deductible health plans versus first dollar coverage. This probably comes up. I just had a question come up today. Employers want to incent the coverage of importation of drugs from foreign countries, telemedicine, on-site medical. And the best way to incent people to use these are to give them away for free. If you have a qualified high deductible health plan and offer the HSA with it, the IRS regulations, tax code basically says those individuals have to meet a minimum deductible before you can provide non-preventive coverage at no cost. To the extent that you want to incent individuals to use those, we had the telemedicine. There was an exception during COVID where you could have telemedicine with your high deductible health plan still being an HSA. That sunsetted at the end of last year. Congress looked like they were going to extend it in December. They didn't do it. It may get extended again if they do an omnibus bill. They keep trying to extend it to these other benefits, but I think the IRS and Congress don't want to see that loss of revenue. So there are a number of vendors out there who say, oh, it's okay, you give it away for free. It's permissible. It's not. If it's more than an insignificant amount. And so I've taken different approaches. We'll work with telemedicine folks where we treat it as an accepted benefit, more like an EAP. We treat it as an insignificant benefit. There's also the idea of capitation where I'm going to pay for this coverage in advance. And so my point is, to the extent your clients are using these types of services on a cost-free basis, you at least want to have a good faith defense of how you're complying with the tax code section without providing non-preventive coverages prior to the minimum deductible being met. There are ways to do it. I'm running out of time. If anyone wants to talk about it, you can shoot me an email. Happy to talk about it. And then I just charge Heath back. That'd be awesome.
That's perfect. All right, we are at the end of the hour here. So if you could get me to that closing slide, I will say thank you to Mike Nader for all your wonderful insights here. He's made his information available there. They don't need mine. Go back to yours. You can reach out to Mike. And then coming up next month, we've got Scott Kelly of Solve. They run a lot of RDP plans and some difficult markets, a wealth of knowledge there around how he's made that work. So join us on April 23rd for Scott. But for right now, say thank you to Mike. Mike, it was a pleasure having you on again. Look forward to having you join us here down the road. Take care, everybody.
Take care.